Hello, everybody, and welcome to Nature Connects. Nature Connects is the Massachusetts TNC webinar series that connects you with scientists, experts, and influencers from New England and around the world. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I'm Deb Markowitz, the Nature Conservancy's Massachusetts State Director and your host. Today, we're going to be talking about a timely and important topic, how to save North Atlantic right whales from extinction. And we're joined today by Boston Globe Pulitzer Prize-winning environmental reporter, David Abel, and the New England Aquarium's president and CEO, Vikki Spruill. David and Vikki will talk about David's newest award-winning film, Entangled. This film describes current efforts to protect North Atlantic right whales from extinction, and it also explores the impact of those efforts on the lobster industry, and it looks at the challenges right whales face in the wild. David and Vikki will discuss the making of Entangled and what the New England Aquarium is doing to help save right whales from extinction and what you can do to help. First, why don't we take a look at the trailer?
The right whale is an extraordinary creature. It's really one of the wonders of the living world. But if something in our management doesn't change, the direction of the population points to zero, and that's extinction.
The North Atlantic right whale is considered one of the most endangered species on the planet.
This would be the first large whale in modern history that would go extinct.
Well, 85% of the right whale population now bears scars that indicate entanglement injury. This was a big problem, and it's an urgent problem.
It's a tragedy that we're losing the right whales. It's emblematic of large-scale changes that are happening on the planet.
Human beings can exist without biodiversity, and this is maybe a harbinger of where we're going.
We need to put as much pressure as we can on the agency to step up and take action right now.
I don't think the urgency can be overstated.
Human action is killing these whales, and human action has the ability to save them.
Lobstermen are stewards of the sea, and they don't want to entangle anything.
I sat here and listened to environmentalist after environmentalist tell me what a murderous individual I am.
My opinion about the whales is what more can we do? Eventually they're going to die off. It's going to happen no matter what.
As your governor, I will do everything I can to defend Maine's lobster industry in the face of this absurd federal overreach.
The challenge is to find ways for the fishing industry and the right whales to coexist in the same waters.
Noah is the fox guarding the chicken coop. You're going to be fired for being a liar and a person who works to kill off the right whale.
One of the problems is that fisheries are one of the main factors that are endangering protected species. You end up with one organisation deeply conflicted with its mission.
Wow, that is so powerful. At the end of this webinar, we're going to share a free link where you can watch the film in its entirety. Just as a reminder, as you think of questions for David and Vikki, please share them in the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. Thanks again for joining us today. David and Vikki, welcome. David, why don't we have you first set the stage for us? What are the challenges facing the North Atlantic right whale today?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Deb, and thank you to the Nature Conservancy and to Vikki and the Aquarium for hosting this. I deeply appreciate it, especially with everything else that's happening in the world at the moment. So it's nice to be able to talk about right whales. So to set the stage, over the past decade, we have seen a 25% decline in the population of the North Atlantic right whale. The population had recovered actually and seemed to almost be a success story in the 1980s when there were believed to be roughly only a few hundred left, perhaps about 300 right whales. There were protections that were put in specifically to protect the whales against ships and vessel strikes, and the population bounced back quite a bit, and the population had reached something like 480 whales, according to the folks at the New England Aquarium that for decades now have been monitoring the population closer than anyone. But over the last 10 years, for a variety of reasons, in part because of the strengthening of lines, these things called vertical buoy lines, the lines that go from the surface of the ocean to the sea floor, there are millions of these lines, all of which have become stronger because they use plastic in them and they use different kinds of technology than the older hemp-based ropes used to use. And as a result, we have seen a plummeting of the population. And just a few months ago, scientists at the aquarium and in the federal government and elsewhere estimated that the population is now closer to about 350 whales. And that makes the North Atlantic right whale among the most endangered species on the planet. I would just end this response with a note of some hope, which is that just today we learned that there were a few more calves born this season, and now we have 11 calves that have been born over the last 2 months or discovered. So that is a ray of hope. We can also put that number in some context because unfortunately for this population to really be able to avoid extinction, it needs to be producing roughly 3 times that number.
Wow. So that's interesting. And I like glimmers of hope. That, we need that right now, of course. I'm wondering, what inspired you to make this film? You do so much across Massachusetts thinking about, the environmental challenges. Why this story? And how did you come across it?
Thanks. So there were kind of a confluence of factors that brought me to this film. It arguably is an outgrowth of my last 2 films, which center on the impact of climate change on our region and particularly our oceans. I made a film a few years ago called Sacred Cod that looked at how the warming of the Gulf of Maine, which is warming faster than just about any other body of water on the planet, was affecting our iconic species, the cod. It's so iconic, we hang a wooden cod from the rafters of the State House here, which we call the Sacred Cod, and thus the name of the film. And then I made a film called Lobster War, which is also about how the warming waters, particularly off of down East Maine, have fueled this conflict between the United States and Canada that dates back to the end of the Revolutionary War. And nobody really cared about this conflict because it was over a small, basically a rock in between Nova Scotia and down East Maine. But all of a sudden, as the waters warmed and the population of lobsters there surged, the waters around that island suddenly became incredibly valuable. And so the Canadians, who long ceded those waters to the Americans, decided that they were going to fish those waters too, and that created all kinds of conflict. And so that was my last film. And while making that film, I learned quite a bit about the conflicts between lobster lines and right whales, and began to learn about how climate change was affecting right whales. And specifically, as we learn about in the film, the warming of the Gulf of Maine has affected the primary food source for right whales. And we've seen a decline in the rice-sized plankton called Calanus finmarchicus, which is their primary food, in a portion of the Gulf of Maine near the Bay of Fundy, which is their primary, which had long been the primary summer feeding grounds for right whales. We saw the population of plankton there decline by some 90%, and that pressed right whales to have to look for food in places where they hadn't been seen before, especially in Canadian waters. And as a result, we have seen many deaths in Canadian waters where they had never been seen in those numbers before. And I'd just say the final explanation for what really brought me to this film was about a year and a half ago, the United Nations produced this report that suggested by the end of this century, as a result of climate change, we are likely to see the loss of roughly 1 million species. And I wrote a story about that for the Globe, but I was just blown away by that statistic and tried to think, how do you tell the story about such a dramatic loss of biodiversity? And I thought, well, maybe you could tell that story through one species, through one iconic species that people might be able to identify with. And I thought, as I learned more about the plight of the right whale and how it's, potentially threatened with extinction in the next 2 decades, I thought this would be a worthwhile subject.
Wow, so it's just really one story among many possible stories about species.
Correct.
One of the things that I am curious about, as a reporter, you get to talk with everybody, and I'm curious about what you learned from talking with the right whale experts and activists, as well as the lobstermen and the people who rely on, the lobster fishery for their living.
Well,
and were you surprised by anything you learned? I'm interested in that too.
I'm continuously surprised, mainly by my ignorance. And
that's a good reporter, right?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I do try to approach most stories with the so-called tabula rasa, and I am not an expert on these subjects. I have to learn. Every time I write a story, a whole new subject often that I knew very little about. And that was certainly the case with North Atlantic right whales. And I should say that the folks at the aquarium, from Scott Krause to Peter Corcoran to Amy Knowlton, these folks who've spent their lives studying this species have been invaluable sources of information and knowledge and guidance as I made this film. And at the same time, as with my other films, my hope is not to just take one side but to present a serious issue through the prism of the complicated, cloudy, turbulent parts of the story that need to be told. And in this case, it's pretty clear that over the past decade, the main reason why so many whales have died is because of us. Nearly every right whale, with the exception of one that I am aware of, which was found a calf, the first calf to be born this season, which was found to be stillborn, all other deaths of right whales have been because of us, either because of entanglements in fishing gear or because of vessel strikes. Those are the all known causes have been attributable to us. And so we know essentially that we need to solve this problem either through limiting the interaction of whales with these vertical buoy lines or through limiting their ability to be hit by vessels. And so to do that, we need to create new policies or laws or regulations to prevent this continued decline in the population. And that means potentially significant pain for fishermen in particular. And so my hope was that we would tell the stories of the folks in the fishing community who have been trying to deal with this problem and who recognize this threat, and those who don't actually, agree that it's a sufficient threat, and try to tell the story in an even-keeled, fair-minded way.
Well, you could just see just from the trailer that there's really divergent opinions about this. And
right.
I suppose that was not surprising to you, and you were expecting to hear a variety of perspectives from the fishing community as well.
Right. And as a reporter, that, it's incumbent upon us, and as a filmmaker, it's incumbent upon us to try to, understand and learn a lot of different points of view and present them in a way that gives them, the due that they deserve, and not in some necessarily splenetic way, but to really hopefully convey the nuances and the emotions and the passions and the stakes here. And with my previous films, ultimately the takeaway, I hope, is that people understand that, number one, climate change is not some distant abstract threat, but one that is having an impact on people's lives right now. And also that whatever we do to try to deal with addressing climate change, whether it's curbing emissions or reducing the impacts on whales, we need to have our regulations crafted in a way that is mindful of those who are affected, deeply by these regulations. And in this case, after nearly 2 years, the federal government just finally released a plan to try to reduce the mortality and serious injuries of the right whales by an estimated 60%. And those regulations could have a very serious effect on a lot of fishermen.
It seems like, if this was an easy problem to solve, it would have been solved, right? And so a film like yours could really be helpful in moving the general understanding of the problem and where the solutions lie. So I applaud you for this. I'm curious, how did you select the New England Aquarium to be a partner, a part of the film?
Well, I should say it's an independent film. The aquarium has been incredibly helpful throughout the making of the film, but I wouldn't describe them as a partner. They have been, they offer probably the deepest reservoir of knowledge on this subject than exists anywhere else. And I think when you asked about being surprised, I mean, I was sort of dumbfounded in some sense when I started learning about just the trove of material that this institution has accumulated over the decades. I mean, they have photographs of every known right whale probably since like 1982 or something like that. And and they have images of if it was not for this body of knowledge that the aquarium has amassed, the it would be extraordinarily difficult for the scientists to track the whales and to identify distinct whales, and also to understand, how they have been harmed. One of the facts that you heard in the trailer and that we explore in the film is that some 85% of all right whales have been scarred by vertical buoy lines, even if they haven't been killed by them. And of those, most have been scarred more than once or entangled more than once in fishing gear. So, without the research done by the aquarium, I don't think we would be able to say that.
That's great. Actually, that's probably a good segue to Vikki. And it's so wonderful to have you with us again, Vikki. Folks who are on this webinar might remember that we've had Vikki on our webinars before, and she's just adds so much to the community and the scientific thinking around our oceans and ocean health. Vikki's going to share more about how the New England Aquarium is involved in the film, and also about their efforts more generally to save the right whale.
Wonderful. So let me I'm having a minor technical difficulty here, but I think I'm all set. Thank you, Deb, for such a warm welcome and introduction. Thank you, David, too, for your just excellent, knowledgeable, comprehensive reporting and filmmaking. I'm feeling a little intimidated because I am not a scientist. I'm a science communicator, and obviously very honored to lead this iconic institution. And so I think together we'll be able to answer so many of the good questions that are coming across the chat. I'm also a huge fan of TNC, and I'm just grateful for this opportunity to get the word out about all of the work that we're doing at the New England Aquarium, and specifically about our work around the magnificent North Atlantic right whale. So I want to spend a little time talking about the aquarium, because I know some of you may not know all of this about us. The right whale is just one of many, many ocean animals that we study in the hopes of protecting both the species, but also their habitats. I've spent the better part of my career helping people understand the importance of the ocean. I know that this particular crowd here today is ahead of the curve, but I think it's fair to say that as a larger community and public, we still really underestimate the role of the ocean in our lives. And, just for starters, for decades, the ocean has served as a buffer for climate change. It's absorbing much of that excess carbon we're producing, and it's warming rapidly as a result. And that has a direct impact on this wonderful North Atlantic right whale. So whether it's climate change or overfishing or pollution or all of the other industrial activities, it's causing irrevocable loss to our ocean's habitat and to biodiversity more broadly. And so at the aquarium, we're working both in the aquarium itself through our animal care work and through our research and our rescue arms to ensure a vital and vibrant ocean for generations to come. And we work primarily to safeguard endangered and threatened species and their habitats. We work to inspire people to take action and protect our blue planet. And we work to affect state and federal policies that do the same. And our Anderson Cabot Center for Ocean Life, that's our research arm of the aquarium. That's where we conduct the research that helps identify solutions to ocean threats, both in our own backyard, but well beyond even our region. And that's where our work on North Atlantic right whales resides. So today I want to talk just a little bit about why we're studying right whales. I want to highlight a little bit of our work, specific work that we're doing. And then I want to share what our research is telling us about what needs to be done to protect this species. And it dovetails very nicely with what David has already outlined. And I want to thank him again, because I think film as a medium is just one of the the best ways there is to really bring the complexity of these issues to life. So thank you. So I often am asked, why whales? And obviously there are practical and there are existential answers to this question. How do you put a value on really the intrinsic value of these incredible ocean animals? And right whales in particular are so iconic and symbolic, really, of our region and beyond. But whales play a really vital role in marine ecosystems as well. They produce really nitrogen-rich fecal matter that's essential to nutrient cycling and delivery in ocean systems, and stimulates the growth of that carbon-absorbing phytoplankton that David mentioned, the plants that provide us with more than 50% of the oxygen in our atmosphere. And yes, every other breath we take comes from the ocean, and whales help that happen. They also absorb and store carbon in their fat and protein-rich bodies throughout their lives. So when a whale dies and sinks, not only do their carcasses provide an abundant food source for deep sea animals, but that stored carbon is taken out of the atmospheric cycle for hundreds to thousands of years. So they play both intrinsic and practical roles in our environment. So here's how it all began. In 1980, our research staff unexpectedly came across 25 right whales in the Bay of Fundy. And before that discovery, scientists believed that the right whale was nearly extinct. And with just 350 individuals, I was struck, David, by even the number in the trailer on the film was 400. It's now just a few more than 350. Last summer, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature moved right whales up from endangered to critically endangered status, making them the only large whale species in the world with this really unfortunate distinction. Our right whale research program is one of the longest running and most comprehensive whale research and conservation initiatives in the world, which we're very proud of. And it's, as important today as it was when we first started it. And it's dedicated to developing innovative science-based approaches to conserve the North Atlantic right whale. We are also founding members of the North Atlantic Right Whale Consortium. That's a group of scientists and managers and conservation organizations and students, all working together and dedicated to sharing information on right whales and advancing science-based solutions to protect their extinction. So we are trying to take a comprehensive and pragmatic approach to our solutions. We also curate, and David mentioned this, the North Atlantic Right Whale Catalog. It's a directory of more than 1 million photographs and very detailed information of 760 plus living and dead right whales since 1935. And then our current research portfolio includes things like habitat monitoring, evaluating right whales' health, developing and implementing solutions to reduce the threats of primarily vessel strikes and fishing gear entanglements, because those are the leading causes of mortality for North Atlantic right whales. And I just want to say a little bit about each of those. So on the habitat monitoring side, habitat monitoring may seem obvious, but it helps us understand the abundance, reproduction, and the behavior of right whales. And simply put, if we know where they are, if we know what they're doing, we can better protect them. Our aerial survey team, along with other collaborators, conducts surveys south of Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. And we also conduct vessel-based surveys in the Bay of Fundy. This past summer actually marked our 40th consecutive year surveying there, and in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, where we and our partners work, and where we are seeing more and more whales spend their summer there. And you're going to hear this theme. This is an indication of how climate change has caused shifts in the distribution of the whales' food and therefore their feeding grounds. So as waters are warming, we're seeing the whales going farther and farther north for food. These efforts and sightings have been used by the US government, by the Canadian government, to advise ships to reduce their speeds and to look out for whales. And this data has informed how industrial activities are conducted in these really critically important habitats. Off the coast of Massachusetts, for example, our data will support reasonable development of offshore wind energy generation to minimize the impact on right whales. And then in addition to our survey work, we use geographic information systems, GIS, and habitat modeling to improve our understanding of past and present right whale distributions and to understand how climate change and warming waters are affecting right whale habitats in the future. And sort of last, but certainly not least, the well-being of right whales is another area of concern to us because their future obviously depends on their ability to reproduce. And we first started seeing a decline in reproduction about 10 years ago, which is when we established our Marine Stress and Ocean Health Program. Aquarium researchers study stress-related hormone levels in right whales by, yes, collecting their feces, as well as their spray or blow, by collecting their blubber and their baleen. And yes, one of our claims to fame is we have a very large collection of whale poop, and it's critically important to understanding these challenges. Our researchers have also published papers on right whales' depleted body conditions. Each of these studies tells us that these whales are extremely stressed, especially as a result of human activities from something called ocean noise. Ships and fishing and the general industrialization of the ocean can be a noisy business. And just to prove this point, our researchers found that in the wake of the 9/11 attacks in 2001, the lack of ship traffic in the Bay of Fundy actually resulted in reduced stress in whales because it was quieter under the water. The 2021 calving season is currently underway, and we're encouraged to learn that so far, and breaking news, as David, our esteemed environmental reporter, just reported, it's now 11 calves have been seen by survey teams in right whales calving grounds in the Southeast United States. By comparison, in the 2020 season, 10 calves were born. Those numbers are lower than the 2010-2016 averages of 15 calves per season. But there's still hope as long as we're seeing calves. The final area of research I'll discuss today is our 30-plus year work on science-based mitigation efforts to reduce ship strikes and entanglements in fishing gear. Using our research about right whale distribution and behavior, our researchers have worked in collaboration with the shipping industry, with scientists, with the US and Canadian government agencies to develop vessel speed restrictions and shipping route changes that have really reduced the frequency of right whale ship strikes in managed areas, both within the US and in Canada. And it was in 2002, after successfully getting shipping lanes in the Bay of Fundy rerouted, that whale ship interactions were reduced by 90%. So there are solutions to these problems. And around that same time, mandatory ship reporting areas were created and speed restrictions were put in place all along the eastern seaboard. Again, none of that would be possible without knowing how these whales are distributed. Our right whale management efforts to reduce vessel strikes continues today, and our survey work and what we're learning about right whales and their changing habitats continues to contribute to these efforts. And on the entanglement side, sadly, we have seen an increase in serious entanglement injuries from vertical line, fixed fishing gear, lines from pot fisheries, lobster, crab, gillnet gear. These injuries affect right whales' future reproduction. It affects their long-term survival. So that's why we have to keep paying attention to it. And today, researchers are working in partnership with us and others on solutions such as designing ropes that are going to break more quickly under pressure, making them far less likely to entangle whales, and on even something called ropeless fishing technologies, which aim to remove almost all of the rope out of the water column. This past summer, for the first time in 40 years, we saw no right whales during our Bay of Fundy field season. It's depressing. This was an unusual summer, obviously, due to the pandemic, and our typically months-long field season was reduced to 6 weeks. But sightings of right whales in the Bay of Fundy have been much more variable since 2011, and we suspect climate change to be one of the primary drivers of this phenomenon. Many are now continuing north to the Gulf of St. Lawrence in Canada to feed. And unfortunately, and I think this is really important to remember, when right whales first started showing up there, that area had even more limited management measures in place than we did in the United States, including an entirely different kind of fishery, the snow crab fishery, that uses a sturdier line, making that line even more lethal to right whales when they get entangled in them. So as a result, the majority of right whale deaths occurred in the Gulf of St. Lawrence and were caused by vessel strikes and snow crab gear entanglements. But we think we can continue to apply some of the solutions we've known that work elsewhere in those areas as well. So the good news is the science shows a path forward for preventing unnecessary entanglement-related deaths to North Atlantic right whales. This is a problem we can solve. The US and Canadian governments must broaden speed restrictions to ensure protection throughout the right whale's range, as we're now understanding it better. We also need to reduce the number of vertical fishing lines in the water, and we need to be modifying fishing gear to allow whales to break free if they do become entangled. And that's why we continue to work locally, we're working nationally, we're working internationally to provide our expertise and our knowledge to encourage the creation of these technologies and the enactment of policies that can protect right whales. Our researchers have testified as expert witnesses at congressional hearings, examining the threats facing North Atlantic right whales. We also worked to support and it's a mouthful, the Scientific Assistance for Very Endangered Right Whales Act, the SAVE Act legislation. This was introduced by our own Congressman Seth Moulton and Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey in the House and Senate, and that provides support for the conservation of North Atlantic right whales. So we hope you'll join us in our work to save the North Atlantic right whale. Write your elected officials, ask them to support legislation to protect these animals, such as reducing ship speeds and the number and the strength of fishing lines off our coast. Tell your friends to watch Entangled. It's a really, really important film on this topic. And so well done, and take action yourselves, learn more, support organizations like ours and others who are working to protect these gentle giants. They're counting on us, and they just cannot go extinct on our watch. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Vikki. So I can totally see, David, why you called on Vikki and her team's expertise to be interviewed as part of your film. Really incredible work the aquarium's doing. I had a little idea of it, but not.
Yeah. I love the opportunity to be able to tell the story.
I know, it's an important story to tell. So we're heading now into a question and answer period. As you think of your questions for David and Vikki, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. We already have a bunch, and I'll try to group them and I'm not gonna necessarily take them in order. I'm gonna try to create a flow. But I have I'm curious first with Vikki. The aquarium, like many organizations, has really been hard hit by the global pandemic. Has your right whale research been impacted, and how can people support the aquarium right now? I run this small nonprofit, and I know we've been impacted, but for you, I know so much of your revenue comes in the door, and if the doors aren't open, that's a problem. And
yeah, no. So look, I think there's not a one of us that hasn't been impacted by this pandemic. And I think cultural institutions and aquariums and museums such as ours have been disproportionately hit in terms of our business model, because we do operate on a earned revenue model, and a lot of it does come from ticket sales and events, which we're closed again now, and we're in an extended closure. That said, our research arm, our Anderson Cabot Center for Ocean Life, is funded a bit differently. We do subsidize part of that from revenue from the gate, but we also get philanthropic grants and government grants to support our work, and we're fortunate and hope to see even more in the new administration of work grants coming to us to support this work. So while our team had to learn how to be in the airplane safely and to work in field stations safely, the work has continued, and their research, while the field study period was shortened a bit, the work continues, and so we're happy about that.
That's great. So I have a couple of questions here for David, and let me just group them. And it's about your filmmaking, really. So what's been happening with North Atlantic right whale since the film's been out? We heard a little bit about that with the calves. And how has the film been received by audiences? And then the third is, did you have a favorite scene to film that when folks go back to watch the whole film, they should be looking out for?
Well, first of all, Vikki, really great presentation. Thank you for that. And I would just underscore what she was saying about just the challenges that our cultural institutions have been experiencing. I am looking forward to the day that I can take my kids back to the aquarium. So I hope we're living in a different world where that is possible again soon. So this film was a very difficult film to complete, because this is very much an ongoing story, and the developments have not stopped since we finished cutting the film for the first time late last spring, and and you guys will all who get to see the film today will see actually a slight update of the film, which given all of the developments that we've experienced in the last few months, we just actually updated a number of things with the film. So you will see the latest version of the film. But some of those developments, obviously, which I mentioned, was in the trailers you saw, we say there are roughly 400 right whales, and now we believe that number to be significantly smaller. We've also, just as we were completing the film, there was this flurry of lawsuits that were adjudicated, and there were decisions that are now likely to have real effects. And just a couple of weeks ago, I had a story on the front page of the Globe about how, in response to pressure from environmental groups, in response to these proposed requirements from the federal government, the state of Massachusetts just released a draft plan that will extend closure that the film looks at, that was mainly centered around Cape Cod Bay and other parts of Massachusetts Bay from February through May every year. That will likely now be extended to all state waters to protect North Atlantic right whales. In other words, fishermen, all lobstermen, will not be able to set fixed gear using roped vertical buoy lines from February through May or until May, and that will be have a significant impact. So that's just a few examples of how this story has continued. And as far as the impact on audiences, this is obviously a very strange time to be bringing a film into the world.
Yeah.
Normally, during this period, we would be showing it at theaters and going to film festivals. Everything, of course, has been virtual. But while at first I was really concerned about that and found that unnerving and upsetting not to be able to see this film that we worked so hard on the big screen, it actually has afforded opportunities like this, which has been a really, really great, intimate way to share what our film is about and to interact with people. And I have to say, I've been I've received a lot of heartfelt responses, and I'm thankful that our film seems to have resonated in the way that we had hoped it would, with people from all sides of the story, from fishermen to regulators to the environmental advocates that have been fighting for increased protection. So I'm truly grateful. As far as the favorite scene, that's like asking, which is your favorite child? I don't know.
You're going to say that.
We just actually had to make very difficult decisions. So we're now talking to potential broadcasters about the film, and so we just had an agreement to distribute the film throughout other markets in Europe and elsewhere. The film is about to be shown next week in South America. But we had to create an hour-long version of the film for broadcast, actually a 54-minute film, which is a wrenching thing when you have to cut 20 minutes from your film. And so if you see that, you'll have an answer to your question, but I'm not going to reveal that.
We get the longer version, so that's great. That's right. Really great. Yes. I can imagine how hard it is. I know when I write like essays for publication, like cutting sentences, like how do you do that? I can't even imagine with scenes. And you know what Vikki said is really true. Film is a really powerful communication tool. Really powerful way to tell a story and really educate the public. So thank you for taking this on. We had a couple of specific questions about the right whales, and I'll bunch them, and maybe this is something Vikki can help us with. How long do right whales live ordinarily? How many calves can a right whale have in a lifetime? What's the gestational period for right whales? And then ultimately, is 11 calves, will there be more? Are they done having their calves? And is a result of decreased activity in our oceans? Or is this, is this a decrease or an increase? And,
Yeah, no, they're long-lived. And David, you can help me here, because this is where not being the technical person is I get a little bit out of my element. But 15 or 11 or 10 is clearly not enough. We need sort of 3 times that, as I've been told, to just sort of keep a more robust population. But we are eternal optimists, right? So we are hopeful. I'll take 11 over 9. I'll take 10 over 8. And so we're happy to see these new calves, but it's not nearly enough to offset the other side of the challenge.
And just to answer a few of the questions, so I think right whales left unmolested can live 70 to 90 years, as far as I understand. They can grow to the size of a school bus. And what were some of the other questions? Just about
number of calves, like how many do they have?
And gestational period.
Right. So I think that the gestational period is an interesting question, and there apparently has been a change in the gestational period. One of the concerning data points that I heard in the last few months came from the aquarium, in that the suggestion was that research has seemed to reveal that the whales are not giving birth as quickly as they used to, and as often as they used to. So I think before this calving season, they're now believed to be roughly, and this is probably the most damning statistic you can come up with in the story of the right whale. They're now believed to be roughly about 85 breeding females left. And when you lose the breeding females, you have functional extinction. And before this calving season, I forget the exact number, but there was something like 68 of them, and I might be getting that wrong, that had actually been found to have given birth, and that was quite concerning. The last time we had as many births as we've had so far this year, now that there are 11, I think I just looked in 2016, there were, I believe, 14 right whales that were born. In 2018, another really damning factoid that had raised a lot of concerns in the right whale community is that for the first time since the research has been, since scientists have been looking closely at this population, in 2018, there were 0 calves born. And that was unprecedented and a dire statistic. And just to sort of stitch this all together, one of the things that Vikki's presentation reflected was that the impacts of entanglements are not just about killing the whales, but the stress of the entanglements. And I think Scott Krauss and Amy Knowlton and a lot of the scientists at the aquarium have said repeatedly and have produced papers showing that that entanglements, the non-lethal impacts of entanglements, are severe and likely making it less likely for the whales to reproduce. And so, and that remains disconcerting. Hopefully there are more calves that will be born this year, and we'll have more signs of hope. But I think Vikki is absolutely right that every whale that's born, is a sign of hope. Last year, unfortunately, of the 10 whales, the 10 calves that were born, 2 died, one of which died hours after being born, after apparently being struck by the propeller blade of a vessel in the calving grounds.
Wow. So we have a lot of questions to get to. So I want to, and we don't have a whole lot of time left. So I want to bunch them again. There were some questions about, and I'm trying to scroll to this one. Somebody said that, whales are intelligent. Is there any evidence that they're learning to try to avoid fishing lines and ships? And whales are sound sensitive. So has there been any thought research around putting beacons on each fishing line that would emit a sound that whales could hear and want to avoid? And then in the same area, there's already equipment that fishermen use to know whether there's fish below, and can that be used to help them know that and avoid right whales that might be in their way?
So I can take a crack at a bit of this. So the notion of, obviously, of technology and beacons on lines, that is central to this idea of ropeless fishing gear. How do we better use technology to identify where there are pens and cages in the water, as opposed to having these ropes that with the buoys on the water surface as the way of seeing. So I think we are just scratching the surface on the use of technology and how to really incorporate technology into the fishing piece of this. And I forget your other question about.
So the fishing gear that people already have to identify that there's fish.
Yeah. And I think that's what we're working on. Woods Hole is working on. There's so many. Most of it is around ropeless fishing gear, or better understanding the actual physics of how the whale gets entangled in the line, so that we can better understand how to decouple that problem. It's really exciting to see the work that's being done in this area. David, you might have more, and in your film you talk about, there are specific examples of this actually.
I just started off by saying that when I started making this film, one of the first questions I had was, well, why can't we just put like a beacon on each of, you only have like 400 of these creatures, and we monitor them incredibly closely. Why not put a tracking device on each of them, and then we can sort of alert the ships, and they would appear on GPS, and that would solve a lot of our problems, and we would know when to remove fishing gear from certain places. Unfortunately, that had been tried, and it's incredibly difficult to keep a tracking device, a satellite tracking device on a right whale for a host of reasons that are above my pay grade that I don't understand. But it has been repeated to me a number of times that is not possible. As far as adding sound to the water column, I think that sounds like a terrible idea, frankly.
More noise.
Yeah. The whales communicate through echolocation, and they're constantly, using their more noise in the water column is not going to be helpful to right whales, and I don't think they would necessarily understand. Of course, I don't speak whale, so I don't know, but I have a hard time imagining that they would recognize some sort of sound as something, as a sign of rope. But there have been efforts to try to use different color water, different color ropes in the water, with the perception that, or the idea that whales might see red or orange or purple better than they could see other kinds of rope. That has not, I don't think, been well proven that is actually likely to help them. Ultimately, the only real clear solution is to remove rope from the water column, and that's what Vikki was alluding to. There is, like a lot of problems in this world, clear solutions to how to deal with this problem. Entanglements for the last decade have been a leading cause of death of right whales, and if we remove the rope from the water, that eliminates one of the largest causes of death. And there is a host of new technology. Arguably, it has become controversial because it's quite expensive in its current incarnation, and still to some extent in a formative state, although this technology has been rapidly advancing. But the idea is that you can allow the lobster fishery to continue to thrive if you replace their current gear with this so-called ropeless fishing gear that uses a variety of technologies, among them little balloons that kind of inflate and bring a connection of traps called a trawl up to the surface. And the hope is that if that technology advances enough and the prices come down, the federal government ultimately could subsidize a transition of the fishery that would protect the whales and allow this, very important part of our economy to continue to thrive here in New England.
So we're running out of time. This is just a great conversation. I see we needed like a whole nother hour to answer all the questions. I apologize to everyone whose questions we haven't got to. There are a whole host of questions about how can I learn more? How can I get involved? How can I, help other folks watch the film? And we will be sending out an email to you with all of that information following this program. So just thank you all for joining us today. And thank you, Vikki and David. You're so inspiring. I like that we ended in a solutions frame of mind.
Yes.
That doesn't happen a lot. I just want to thank everyone who tuned in for your support of the Nature Conservancy. Your support is what makes this work possible. And as I said, we'll be sending you a follow-up in the coming days with links to the resources we talked about and a recording of the webinar. And if you're enjoying these webinars, please share them with your friends. You can also follow us on social media at conserve_MA on Facebook and Instagram to keep up with our work and get updates on upcoming virtual opportunities to connect with us. Also, please join us next Thursday, January 21st at noon. We'll be joined by entrepreneur, podcaster, and activist Jason Jacobs. Jason is a longtime software entrepreneur and founder of Runkeeper, but he's shifted his focus towards tackling climate change. Jason dove in headfirst, learning from experts in the field, and then has shared that information with his audience, at first through a newsletter and then through a podcast called My Climate Journey. Jason will talk about his shift from tech to climate change and what he's learned along the way, and we hope you can join us. As always, you can find the latest webinar schedule and register at nature.org/MA webinars. And I just want to remind you, in the chat, there is a link for you to see for free this whole film. So please do it. It's good, I think, for 72 hours or something like that. And so not for many days, but you can see it for free on us. And in our follow-up email, we'll also have a link where you can see it at a discount. So if you don't catch it in these next couple days, there will be another opportunity. So thank you all again for joining us, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.